and welcome to those of you that are joining us today to talk about presence. My name is Jen Weigel, and I am a director of program management at Microsoft. And I am here with
Naomi Margolis. I am a principal engineering manager at Microsoft in the Excel Copilot space.
And before we get started, we did just want to talk briefly about engaging with us in the chat.
Yeah, and we would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What are your questions? What are your reactions? Especially, what are your reactions? We love to hear what is landing, what is not, what questions that you have. So we'll be keeping an eye on chat. We'll be responding either in the video or directly in chat, and you might even see what you post on amplified on our screen.
Perfect. With that, we're going to dive right into our topic today, which is presence. So I want to start with a little bit of a story. It's not my own story, I will say. I cribbed it from another author. But in the book, How Women Rise, Sally Helgeson shares a story about something she noticed when she was in a large meeting with more than 30 people. So the meeting was in a really cramped room, seating was crowded and haphazard. And as people started trickling in late to the meeting, she noticed that every woman in the room, or nearly every woman, I should say, acknowledged the newcomers by kind of signaling like, oh, hey, there's a spot right here, or they moved their stuff over to make it very clear, that there was more space. At the same time, the women also made themselves physically smaller. So they were pressing their legs together, holding their arms to their sides, even positioning their notepads in front of them, right? But just kind of all that compression, so to speak. The men in the room, on the other hand, made no attempt to take up less space. So some of them, may have already been kind of sprawled out, arm around the chair kind of thing. They just kept it. They didn't move. It's interesting because you can interpret the women's gestures as welcoming, inclusive, generous, just a measure of how attuned they are to other people and their needs, which is absolutely true. But if you want to take your career to the next level, you have to find this balance of being in tune with the needs and physical comfort of others and not inadvertently shrinking yourself. So when you physically make yourself smaller, think about what messaging is your brain sending? How is that telling you about how you belong? So have you ever found yourself moving to the corner of a room, sitting in the back of a meeting, otherwise just kind of making your presence less known? If you have, what you're doing, it's called minimizing. It's a very real physical and psychological protective phenomenon that started with animals. Humans, of course, have perfected this, but it's really just part of our evolution. And research shows that when you draw in your arms and your legs, you tighten your body, you hunker down, you move aside, you're undermining your ability to project authority and power. Not only do others read you as diminished when they see that drawing in, but you begin to feel that way yourself. And that's because those physical attempts to shrink send a message to your brain and the rest of the room, the people around you, that you shouldn't be occupying the space, whether that's physically or metaphorically. Your brain will interpret this as you're not big enough, you don't belong, and others are more deserving than you. So you can counteract these signals you're sending yourself and others by practicing presence. Having presence means that you can be fully present for a task, a conversation. In that moment, you have the confidence to be your authentic self, no matter what the situation is and that you're up against. So I want everybody to stop for just a minute, and I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of thinking here. Ask you to think about a moment when you felt personally powerful. So a moment when you had the ability to act as your boldest, sincerest self. Could have been at work, maybe even back in school, at home, it could be somewhere else. Did you nail a presentation or a test? Did you make a colleague or a family member laugh? Did you feel proud about something that you learned or accomplished? Take a minute and think about this. Think about your power. Think about how that moment felt. What happened? How did you react? What was it that made you feel powerful in that moment? How did it feel? Naomi, I'm going to throw you on the spot here for a second. I know we didn't talk
Yeah.
about this. You have one of these moments. What are you thinking about? What are you recalling where you just felt powerful in that moment?
Well, I'm going to first of all acknowledge that I'm in an office that has a window and you can probably see the lighting change. And I feel like it's probably changing how I show up. And I was just thinking if I could bring this lighting with me everywhere, it makes me feel powerful. It makes me feel like I've got this brilliant spotlight on me. That, of course, completely contradicts the quote that we've got up because this is not something that I can change. I just have to accept it. And we don't get a ton of sunlight in Redmond. So the fact that we do, I'm like, I'm just basking in it. Um, but also I'll share a story, and it's how I started out not feeling powerful and brought in, and this is foreshadowing for what Jen you're about to cover, but it was working in a really intense situation. I got pulled in for this special project specifically because the project was not going well. So I was being brought in for a project and people knew I was brought in, which, makes them really, really welcoming and happy that I'm there because of how the project is going so well. And I would get there in the morning, and it was also this kind of introvert's version of Saw, where it was this enormous conference room, 25 people seated around a conference room, and that was where you were all day long. And so knowing that that was what I was going into, I would get there early in the morning and I would go into the restroom. Oh, so luckily for me, I was the only woman in this project, so I had the restroom entirely to myself, and I would practice what Jen is about to share to help myself feel more powerful. I would practice these power poses. And I remember feeling kind of absurd going into the bathroom, double checking, making sure no one was around. But then I would be, again, foreshadowing, striking that power pose and holding it so that when I went into this room, I could show up with a sense of power. Is that too
Uh,
much foreshadowing, Jen? I'm going to jump straight
no,
in.
I mean, if you showed up today, you probably should have expected that we may talk about power posing a little bit. That's not the only aspect, but it is a thing. It is a real thing. There's a whole TED Talks on it, right? So we, of course, are going to talk about it. So if anybody else, as you're thinking about that moment, if you're willing to share, please drop that in the chat. What was that moment for you that made you feel powerful? How did it make you feel? Or how is it making you feel right now as you're reflecting on that?
Yeah.
For me, there was actually just something very recently where I was just having one of those days where like every conversation, it seemed like it was clicking, you know,
Ooh.
and I went out of a one-on-one with one of my directs and I was like, I actually feel like I added a lot of value today. Like we were coaching her on something very specific. And so sometimes you just have those like, how, I showed up, I did the thing, and I actually walked away feeling like this was good. I'm not saying I don't add value to every conversation I'm in, of course, but my point is like sometimes the vibe feels different, and
Yeah.
so it was one of those moments for me, and just thinking about how that made me feel. I got so much energy from that.
Yeah.
Um, so, and just thinking about these moments we have, right? Just recalling these moments, it primes you. It helps you feel good right now. I mean, as you're thinking about the story that you were just telling, even as you were
Totally.
doing some of the posing, right? It's you're priming your brain, so your psychological state is infused with these feelings of confidence and strength. To be powerful, do you have to be able to command a room? Nope. But you have to learn how to command yourself. So I want to take just a minute to talk about personal power versus social power. Personal power is the freedom from dominance of others, right? It means that you're open, optimistic, risk tolerant, more likely to recognize and take advantage of opportunities. Social power is the capacity to control others' behaviors. So people think they want social power, but what you really need is your own personal power. No one can take away your personal power. Only you can give it away. So when you're minimizing or when you're feeling like an imposter, you
Mhm.
are more likely to give away your personal power. And
You
so
almost do
personal
it
power, yeah, go ahead.
you almost do it reactively. As soon as it's this chain reaction where you start getting smaller and you think, I'm just gonna hide in the corner, or if I can be inconspicuous, then I'm unthreatening, and it just starts really feeding into itself. And the inverse is true as well. So if you start sitting up, it creates this natural energy around you where people start noticing you, and then you almost feel this, oh well, I kind of have to step up because I'm already stepping up. It's this really, it's a profound chain reaction that you might not realize.
It is, and it's interesting because I mean, there's a lot of. I'm not going to get into the science because I am no expert by this, but there are books, there are studies on this. There's a lot of science behind this because, to your point, I mean, this goes all the way back in evolution when animals often had to minimize themselves, hide themselves to survive in the wild. And it's interesting because some of them, like the pufferfish, actually have that reaction, right? Where they try to take up more space to make them seem more threatening when they're in that type of situation, that fight or flight kind of situation. And so it works very similar with our own bodies. And that's part of what we're focusing on today. It's not so much that you innately have all of this confidence, right? Like if I tell you, just be more confident, just go into the situation, just be more confident. The focus of the conversation today is what tips and tricks can you use with your body, because it'll automatically trigger your mind. So that's really what more of this is about, is how do you start to use your body in a way that you do show up more confident. And eventually it's kind of I hate to use the phrase fake it to make it kind of thing, but it kind of is in some ways. Like
Do
some
it.
of these tips that we're going to share today, you're going to be like, I would never do that. I don't feel like I could get up and power pose in a meeting, and I'm not going to tell you to do that. But like, you may go, that doesn't even sound comfortable to me. No, thank you. But the reality is, if you find ways that work for you, it starts to train your mind. So, and that's really what this is about. Presence is that it's that personal power. It's having confidence to act upon your own beliefs, your attitudes, and your values with just the sense that your actions will be effective. And effective doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the results that you always desire, but it's coming away from the interaction feeling like I accurately represented who I am and what I
Yeah.
want. So being that boldest, sincerest self.
Being authentic too, because at the end of that, if you do show up in that way, when you leave and you're walking away, you know how Jen described that sense of leaving the meeting, having that sense of adding value, that energy that it brought to it, that authentic self is you feeling proud of who you are and how you showed up, not having, you spend so much less time second guessing yourself because you just feel competent, pleased, happy with how you showed up.
And it can come through with just practice. I mean, it's just taking some of these tips we're going to talk about, it's just practicing, and it becomes more natural to you and you don't even give it a second thought.
Yeah.
So on the flip side, when you're feeling powerless, you are undermining your own ability to trust yourself too. Like by not claiming the space that's yours, by not feeling that energy, that little extra, posture in some cases, right? You're not claiming that space that's yours, and you're minimizing your power, whether you realize it or not. And so we're going to look at some slides in a few minutes that I'll show you kind of like the differences that I'm talking about in the physicality. So how can you claim your personal power and establish presence? So I was going to ask the audience thumbs up if they've heard power posing, but they've heard it now because you kind of, tip the hand there, Naomi. um, so what I
I
do want
got
to do
so
is
excited about it.
no, it's great. It's great. What I do want to do though is show some slides here. So let me flip over to. So what we're looking at here, you can see. Think about athletes. So think about the athletes crossing the finish line in a victory stance, or the gymnasts starting their starting position and their ending position are the same, right? It's that arms up, chin up, chest open kind of thing. Even Sherlock Holmes just steepling his fingers. Think about those postures and compare that with these. So these postures in this slide are similar to the stance that you probably take almost every day. So at lunch, you may be kind of hunched over your food. When you're walking, you may be hunched. When you're looking at your phone, there actually is a term now for this called eye hunching. Because we just naturally look down at our phones and we kind of hunch our shoulders and we pull ourselves in a little bit. So many of these are minimizing postures, whether you realize that you're doing or not. You just kind of fall into it, that slouching, that hunching. And when you go back to these are open, expansive, and confident. Even if you're just standing at attention, right?
Yeah.
Just the standing there. It's showing something that's much more expansive. Whereas these are closed, they're small, they're hunched. So the way that we carry ourselves from moment to moment blazes the trail that our lives take, right? That the way that you carry yourself is that source of personal power. And that kind of power is the key to presence. So taking control of your body language isn't just about posing in a powerful way. It's more about counteracting the fact that your body poses in a powerless way much more often than you think. So it's easy when we were giving kind of the examples of like, oh, well, you're intentionally going to the back of the room or you're trying to not be seen kind of thing. It's not those moments. It's just how do you naturally tend to fall into looking at your phone, eating lunch kind of hovered over your food, like that kind of thing. It's so taking control of your body language is just trying to actually counteract some of the things that you do unconsciously. And it's about reclaiming yourself in a more powerful way when you do that.
You know, Jen, listening to this too makes me realize one of the things that Jen and I have worked on this presentation for the last couple of years, and it's one of the things that we've talked about just in our personal conversations. And I recall that when I work on at campus, and periodically would go and meet people, and there was a place where you would just stand and wait for people, and I started looking around and seeing that everyone was in that eye hunch pose, and I had been practicing because of this presentation we'd been working on. So I practiced doing that standing pose. I wasn't Wonder Woman by any means, but I had my shoulders back. I was not looking at my phone and I was looking around. And one, I felt exceedingly awkward. I was the only one who was not actively looking at her phone and being, like, I'm consumed by this. One of the things that struck me was how cut off you are as well when you are in a crowd looking around versus in a crowd looking at your phone. And so it's minimizing, but one of the things we talk about for presence is being present. And I think that that's a really important outtake from this too. So if you're practicing one, just know that it can be as subtle as like moving your elbows out a little bit, which is what I do in meetings when I start shrinking. I'm like, nope, put your elbows on the chair. That will automatically reinforce the posture. But also just having that moment of thinking about what do you want to get out of the moment? Do you want to be present? Do you want to show up in a way that is confident?
It's really interesting too. I love that you just shared that moment where you were like, I didn't look at my phone. I actually think that's a power play. So I was on
Ooh.
vacation. I was on vacation the last 2 weeks, basically. I got back just earlier this week. And it was interesting because we were at this resort for 10 days. And of course, the first day or two, we were glued to our phones. We've been traveling. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh, we've got Wi-Fi again, and just glued to our phones. And then after, a day or two, I was like, what do we need our phones for? My husband and
Yeah.
I, like, let's just kind of put them away. And so we actually didn't use them much. But it was fascinating because I was watching people come in and it was the same kind of thing. And I was observing the very first night we were there of all these people that are sitting in restaurants, no phones in sight. And all I could think was, that's a power play because they're basically so in the moment. They're not distracted by their device. They're not worried about what else is happening. And I mean, it's great. It's easy to say, well, yeah, I can do that on vacation. But like, why can't we do that all of the time? There's times where you have to be on your phone. Don't get me wrong. But like, when you walk into a meeting, how often, if you're in an actual physical meeting, how often do you see people, the fact that I have my phone right here, by the way, how often do you see people put their phones down on the table? and they sit there in front of us the entire meeting.
Yep.
What if you didn't bring your phone, or you left it in your bag or your back pocket or whatever, and you didn't pull it out? That seems to me like a power play at this point. So speaking of Wonder Woman, because you mentioned more foreshadowing,
Yeah.
wherever you're joining us from now, if you're able to, I want you to stand up. And I want you to think about the way that Wonder Woman stands. Whether your Wonder Woman is the classic Linda Carter, you're channeling some Beyonce, or maybe going a little more contemporary with Gal Gadot. So put your feet shoulder width apart, put your hands on your hips, and just feel the way that your shoulders expand. Feel the way that you're more open here. So studies have shown that holding this pose for a few minutes prior to an interview or a presentation make people more confident. Just think about that. And it doesn't have to be as exaggerated as as maybe it looks on the slide, or maybe as you're feeling right now. But even just that posture, that movement can make a big difference. I'm gonna pull the slides down. So you can, oh, by the way, if you're still power posing, you can stop now. You can sit back down.
Or you could just remain that way, because just
it's interesting because people that have been attending our sessions for a while may have noticed I'm always standing when I present in these sessions. Mm. And I do the same thing in big meetings where I'm presenting. I stand because, one, I just find I have so much more energy. I actually, one morning I was super tired and I needed to present and I was not feeling energy. And I started sitting down and I realized that I was like monotone and like I was just dragging the meeting down. So I actually paused, moved my desk up to standing mode and stood, and it just made such a difference immediately. So it's just something for you to think about. That's one of the nice things about working remotely now too, is that you can do this much easier than when you're in person. Although I will say I've been in person meetings where I actually will stand up and move around the conference room sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that.
Power plays.
It is, but for me, part is just a comfort thing too. You can only sit for so long.
Yeah.
So some benefits to using your body to claim your space instead of minimizing. There are actual benefits beyond the things we've been talking about. So your testosterone increases, and testosterone is our assertiveness hormone, and your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, decreases. So powerless poses show the opposite: lower testosterone and higher cortisol. So less assertiveness, more stress. So you can just, whether it's the power posing or a little bit of the posture stuff.
Yeah.
Your posture,
and again, it doesn't have to be huge. Like, keep in mind, even during this presentation, I notice my default is like everything is tucked in, and I really just work on, it's a couple inches. It probably doesn't immediately register to you, but it shifts things in my body that immediately signal to my body, taking up more space. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get doing it.
You do. And it's the small things. That's exactly your posture, the way you walk, even the way you walk. When you've got like that slump, the iPhone hunch we were talking about, when you're more slumped, but if you're actually just a little bit more, and all it takes is throwing back your shoulders just a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe just lifting your chin up a little bit, rather than kind of the default looking down. You're more expansive and you're more open. And that actually impacts your memory. So if you receive information when you're open, you're more likely to remember the positive than the negative. If you receive information when your posture is closed, you're more likely to remember the negative and not the positive. So I would challenge you the next time you have a performance review or a feedback conversation, think about whether you're open or you're more closed. Because if you're sitting down at your desk, there's a good chance that you're just naturally slumping a little bit in your chair. Yeah. And that may mean that the negative pieces are actually going to what stick in your memory more. So think about, how can I, even if it's just a slight adjustment, like you did, Naomi, how can I be a little bit more open for this conversation? And that way my mind, my brain will actually remember more of the positive. So that's actually the one of the slides I showed earlier showed the military standing attention. That's actually one of the reasons they make them stand at attention, is because it not only has, shows a position of strength, but there's more awareness in receiving important messages. So that's one of the reasons they have them stand at attention.
Yeah, I want to throw out too. I love what Katie wrote. Establish presence in time and space. Yep.
That's exactly, whether that's setting your phone aside, that is the power play, or a power play,
Yep.
or throwing the shoulders back a little bit, just making that slight adjustment.
Yeah.
It's power play. It is. Because remember, you're owning your personal power. You're showing up. So our movement, just like our posture, tells the brain how it manages information. So think about that. The other thing is when we feel powerful, our voices spread out and take up more space than when we feel powerless. So here's another power play. And this is actually a way that you can claim some social space. Don't rush your words. Don't be afraid to pause. You deserve the time you're using. Make more direct eye contact. It actually turns out studies say, and I'm terrible at this because I just naturally talk quickly. Like I'm very deliberately slowing down right now. I just naturally.
This is Jen slow.
Yeah, this is.
People. This is Jen slow.
I just naturally talk very quickly. But studies say people who speak slower are less likely to be interrupted, and they have a higher chance of being heard clearly and understood.
It's so counterintuitive. I love that. It's so counterintuitive.
So, well, and I like when I hear that, it makes me feel like I can almost picture like people are hanging on your word because you're speaking slower, and you probably don't speak as often because you are speaking slower. So they really kind of are hanging on every word, wondering what's coming next. Like leave them in suspense a little bit, right? Whereas I talk super quick and they're just like, okay, how fast can I take notes to try to keep up with all of the things that she's telling me to do or all the ideas she's throwing out.
And I'm also thinking too that often women don't pause because we just want to make sure we get to the end and we're often interrupted and it feels like you have to speak quickly. So one of my favorite things to do is if I'm watching a TV show or something is to watch how men pause and take up space and don't seem to think that anyone's going to interrupt. And women, even in fictional women, try to make sure that they can finish. So I recognize when you hear this, it might sound counterintuitive and you might think, nope, I'm not going to give that a try. I'd recommend at minimum giving that a try, seeing what happens, and also being ready to say, oh, I'll just finish. Not even let me finish, but I'll just be finishing. You're not asking for permission. You're just continuing. It is like riding a roller coaster in terms of you will get off the ride and go, wow.
I love that phrasing. I will finish. Because even if you take the pauses, you'll get interrupted. It happens. Right? But I like that because I do tend to say, let me finish. Usually in a pretty direct and blunt voice at that point.
Boom.
Yes, the hand. But I like that. I will finish. Or I've used this too. I was speaking. Excuse me. I was speaking, and then I just continue speaking. These are all a little bit power. I mean, this is showing. It's taking the space that you own, whether that's with your voice, with your pauses, with your body. You're claiming your personal power here. So, the other thing I wanted to mention too, when we're talking about benefits of some of the physical aspects, is studies have actually shown that expanding your body also toughens you to physical pain. So that's just something else to think about. Not that I hope anybody is running into physical pain situations in meetings or at work, but you know, one of those moments. I mean, I watch a lot of Survivor, probably way more than I should, but think about some of those. Part of me is like, how do they sustain this? Like this. Some of the situations are put in, but it's expanding your body. You'd notice they're not minimizing in a lot of those challenges. So, and of course, all this makes you more confident, right? So, whether you're in a challenging situation and power posing ahead of time, or even just doing some subtle stuff, it's important just to kind of purvey that strong, upright posture. And that was the other thing I was going to say too, is like when you go into a really challenging situation, like if my boss is giving me tough feedback, I'm not going to stand up and power pose in the middle of that because that's going to backfire on me, right? Studies have actually shown that in job interviews, eye contact and a strong handshake don't make a difference. So making obvious use of your body language was actually seen as manipulative.
Ooh.
But it's very different when it feels natural. So when it comes across as natural. And so some of the things we're going to recommend for you today isn't necessarily going to feel natural at first. So you have to think about how things do become habit to you, how they do become more natural. So some subtle things you can do to maintain your presence naturally. Channeling good posture. We already talked a little bit about this, but just keeping your shoulders back, your chest open. It's so subtle. Naomi has done it during this conversation. Mine is much more because I'm trying to make a point, right? But you just naturally did it. It's so subtle. Sitting or standing up straight, breathing slowly and deeply. Not so deep that you're sighing because that'll send a whole other message. But
Oh, you've been in those meetings?
we've all been in those meetings. Keeping your chin up and level, not so far you're raising your nose at people, but just up, because it is. I think a lot of times, again, it goes back to the way that we've trained ourselves with our phones is we tend to fall down just a little bit. So just chin up a little more. When you're stationary, keep your feet on the ground. Don't wrap your ankles around the edge of a chair. You want to make sure that you feel solid, not like you're going to lose your balance if someone bumped into you. When you can, move around too. So I already mentioned, when I present, I prefer to stand. You can see that I'm moving. I actually am physically moving a little bit in the room. It's more energizing, more powerful for you, and it allows you to inhibit more of the room as the presenter. And then you can also use some props to force you to stretch out. So if you're standing, you can rest your hand on a table or back of the chair. If you're sitting, you can lean forward. One of the tricks I do, like if I feel like I'm low energy in a meeting and I don't want to stand up, do I have a pen or something out in front of me that I can grab off of the desk? And just that stretch, just that reach a little bit there can make a difference.
Yeah.
So building your presence, it's all about this just incrementally changing. Nudge yourself each day. Just encourage yourself to be a little courageous, a little bolder, slowing down a little more, taking more of your time. Maybe it's as simple as putting the phone away and doing that power play. Just nudge yourself to be brave a little each day. I want to talk for just a second about self-affirmations. So self-affirmations like, I'm confident. Turns out those usually fail. But studies have shown that the mind-body approaches like power posing, that little bit more, posture, has a more primitive and direct link to your mind. Your body, again, is telling your brain to be confident. We talked about voice and taking up space. Vocabulary is also another aspect. Remove your minimizing vocabulary. So here's another power play for you. Stop saying the word just. Oh, I'm just checking in. Just wanted to say. That's minimizing.
Yep.
Say thank you instead of sorry. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting. I tended to do that. I until we did this session the last time, I actually was guilty of this a lot. I'd show up late to meetings because I'm back to back. And I would start and I go, oh, I'm so sorry for being late. I have now trained myself to start with, thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for your time. Another thing,
it changes the dynamic so considerably too about not only what you're saying, but what you're asking for. Instead of saying, I'm asking you to forgive me, you're saying, I appreciate you. And the profound difference, again, it sounds like such small things, and yet it changes the dynamic so significantly.
It goes back to your point about saying, let me finish, not saying that, because then it sounds like you're asking for permission, but I will finish.
Yeah.
Don't
She,
sorry,
yeah,
I
saying,
was
"Let me
talking.
finish."
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
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 Yeah.
Another thing is remove I believe and I think.
Mhm.
This one can be kind of controversial because people are like, why can't I say that I believe or I think? It
Mm-mm.
actually makes it sound like you doubt yourself. Just instead of say, I think the right answer is, you know, it is this.
Yeah.
I believe that the route we've agreed to is just the decision was. So just
Yeah.
those little tweaks right there. And we already talked about slowing down, speaking slowly, taking your pauses, occupying your space. Claim the time that's yours. That's ultimately what you're doing. And this is true as well when you need time to figure out how to respond to decisions in high moments of power or in high pressure moments, right? Taking your time in those moments is power. I'm sure many of us have been in situations before where you get an email that puts you on the defensive. You get that email and you're like, oh, I did that. Or you would have read my other email. Yeah, exactly. You get that moment. It can be really tempting to respond immediately.
Mm.
When you do that, though, you're coming from a place of potential anxiety or threat. Like that's how you're feeling. You're feeling threatened. You're feeling anxious about this. Taking the time to reflect on it, to sleep on it, that usually changes your frame of mind. It's power play. It is. It's a power play to do that. Take your time. Claim that time that is already yours. Another thing that you can do is reframe the experience. So this is kind of when you're in that fight or flight, you're worried about it. When you're going into that high anxiety situation, you're gonna feel nervous, probably. Like I said, fight or flight. Do I want to show up and try to be the puffer fish, or do I want to get out of this situation as fast as I can? So this is very, very counterintuitive. Instead
Mhm.
of telling yourself to stay calm, tell yourself to get excited. This is an opportunity. This is great. Reframe the experience. Welcome that challenge. A study
Yeah,
actually found that.
picture Neo, okay, bring it on. In The Matrix, sorry. I should give the full reference. But picture that. Like he is standing up and he is like, okay, this is the battle I am here for. And hopefully you're not going to feel that sense of battle all the time or challenge all the time. But when you are in those moments, it doesn't really help to wish yourself away. So giving yourself the power, giving yourself the props to say, okay, here's what I'm working with.
That's exactly. And it's interesting because the study actually found that reframing feelings before an audition, like psyching yourself up, right, resulted in actors and singers saying that they were more present in the moment because they were just viewing it as a different type of situation.
Mhm.
They forgot about the audition. They were just having fun, performing, doing what they love to do, right? And so that confidence comes through as natural and results in landing the role. So reframing that moment also focuses on what's in front of you. It's shifting the meaning of the emotion you're experiencing from anxiety to excitement.
Mhm.
And that helps you harness what you need to succeed under pressure. So if you can not think of it as a threatening situation or a scary situation, but rather like, here's an opportunity for me to show up and be who I am.
Yeah, that opportunity moment. Plus, you get to look back on it in a different way too. So your future self will thank you. I'm very much about the future self. Is my future self going to thank me? And going through that moment, if it's an audition, an interview, or an experience, and reminding yourself, like, yep, I'm here. What do I actually want to get out of this instead of how can I get away from this?
That's exactly it. It's not, I have to do this. It's, I get to do this and I am
Yeah,
going to learn, or I am going, I'm going to get something out of this.
yeah.
So
And what do you want to get out of this? Get excited. Think about your future self looking back and saying, "Oh my god, I crushed that. I crushed that interview. I showed
make
up so well."
Yes, make that one of those moments that primes the pump for you later. One of those memories that you can recall back and all of a sudden you feel good. So, um, we've already talked quite a bit about power posing or moving your body, right? So I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, but just something for y'all to remember is you can fit power posing in your daily posture, right? So this could be you get out of bed in the morning, you can practice a couple of your favorite poses for a few minutes. You put your feet on the ground just like that. When you can find it, make the most of privacy in a public space. So Yeah. Just even if you're walking down a stairwell, like, are you hunched or are your shoulders back? Don't sit in waiting rooms hunched over your phone. Think about standing or walking around instead, or maybe just the real power play, not having your phone out at all. You'll be the only one in the room, which shows that you're not worried and stressed or attached to that device like everybody else is. You are
Jen,
fully present in the moment.
it shows you're a time traveler and you don't have a phone. Let's be honest. Like,
I am standing by this is the new power play. So granted, maybe a lot of people at the resort around me that were doing that are retired, so they're not worried about work and all the other things. But hey, if that's the way it is, I want to start channeling the retired life now.
yeah, love it.
Adopt open gestures, just more. They actually say that arms outstretched with your palms up are more welcome and trusting. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to go greet everybody like this, right? But just thinking about how you can add that into some of your stuff. Avoid the penguin arms. So pinning your upper arms to your side and only gesturing. I'm way over exaggerating this, of course, but something to think about. You can also set posture reminders for yourself. So something that I've done before is if you're at your desk all day too, put a Post-it at the top of your monitor that just reminds you to look up, or put a picture of someone that you love right there, because it's somebody, it'll make you smile, or a favorite quote or something like that, it allows you to look up, you see it, and it reminds you. What else? Oh, the one other thing I was to say is you can even just be as subtle as combining power posing with your daily routine. So like brushing your teeth in the morning, just put one hand on your hip. Subtle as that. Because it opens up your posture and it just starts to get your body feeling more used to that. You can also use words to send the signal to your brain. So this is not self-affirmations. This is having a mantra to remind yourself to turn around your thoughts of self-doubt, right? So like, what other people think of me is none of my business.
Yeah.
It's really hard to remind yourself that one. But sometimes I use it and it'll stop me in my tracks, especially when I'm starting to doubt, like, oh my gosh, what could they be thinking? Nope, none of my business. Or I trust myself to make decisions. Or I'm a work in progress. I'm continuing to grow and I'm learning something every day.
Progress, not perfection.
Yes.
I like that one.
Yes. I was going to say, you can't see my whole sign, but I've got a sign back here in the corner that says that: progress, not perfection. You can also use music. So you can crank your anthem. Think about a song that makes you feel powerful. I
Jen,
sometimes do this. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your anthem, Jen?
It's Me Too by Meghan Trainor, actually.
I don't know if I knew that. I'll go listen.
It's the song where I'm like, oh, I gotta, especially if I don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm like, I gotta gear up for this next conversation. I've got an Amazon device in the corner over here in my office that I'm not gonna say her name because it'll trigger her, but where I'll just say, hey, play that song, and I don't even have to listen to the whole song. It just starts to get me going. So cranking your anthem there can help people. Using your memory to remind yourself. Sorry, go ahead.
One memory is I was about to give notice at this job that I hated. And I was so excited, but also a little anxious. And I was driving into the office. This was pre-pandemic, so everyone went in every day. And this is such a cliche, but I was blasting the Rocky theme. And I got in the elevator and I was like, I mean, it was just all, and so I can hear 3 notes from that and I'm like, yep, priming the pump. That's what I'm doing.
And that's all it takes too. That's the whole thing, is at this point, all I have to do is think about the intro to the song, and it's priming the pump too for the memory. So whether it's priming the pump with a song that you remember, even if you're not listening to it, or the powerful memory that we talked about earlier, it's, you think about moments where you felt in control or pumped up, just recalling those can be enough. Another technique is breathing, which everybody's like, well, I breathe all the time. I mean, this is relaxation breathing. So just 2 seconds in, 5 seconds out. So it's that longer exhale. That also can because it slows you down, and it can make you feel more powerful. I mean, it's all about the mind-body connection, right? So whether it's posture, breathing, yoga, lowering your vocal pitch, visualizing that you're just in a more expansive pose. You may not be able to do that physically, but just think about that. expanding your body changes the way you feel about yourself. So find the technique that best suits you. Ultimately, expanding your body brings you to the present. It helps improve your performance. Um, and even though, your body language obviously governs the way other people perceive you, more importantly, it governs the way that your brain perceives yourself. Remember, it goes back to that message we talked about in the very beginning. What message is your brain sending when you minimize and you move yourself over and make yourself small intentionally? Your brain's telling yourself you're not good enough. So when you do this and you expand your posture, and you're holding more powerful poses, and I don't necessarily mean power poses, but just that more powerful posture, is doing the exact opposite, and it's reinforcing your confidence. So there's a quote by Amy Cuddy from her book that her book Presence that I just want to read because I love this. How you carry your body shapes how you carry out your life. Your body shapes your mind shapes your behavior, and your behavior shapes your future. Let your body tell you that you are powerful and deserving, and you become more present, enthusiastic, and authentically yourself. Find your own way to pose. So we've given you actual posing suggestions, but then also other ideas. So when I say your way to pose, it's that technique. Find your own way to show up. So I want everybody to just take a minute, reflect. How and when do you exhibit some of that minimizing behavior, the hunching, the slouching, or intentionally, whether intentionally or not, right? So how do you exhibit that? Is it in your body language? Is it your voice, your tone, your pitch, how fast you're speaking, your words? Do you apologize when it's not your fault? Do you say we when you mean I? Think about those. What change in behavior would increase your presence and make it felt by yourself, your own brain, and others around you? So think about that. Are there any aha moments that you've had in today's session? And I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'm going to pause and just see if there's anything in the chat coming through about those aha moments. So if you're willing to share, I want you to think about what struck you today and make a note. And your aha moment could be, I apologize when it's not my fault. And a follow-up action you may take from that is, I'm going to stop saying sorry for being late, or apologies for not responding earlier. And instead, I'm going to say, thank you for waiting, or thank you for patience. Another aha moment could be that you tend to make yourself small physically. And your commitment, how you're going to take action, is that you're going to claim your space. So what's your aha moment, if you're willing to share?
And Jen, while we're looking at comments too, I want to share. So over the last month, I've helped with hiring for the org that I work in, and I've done so many informationals and interviews that I actually can't remember how many they are, but I can go and look at my notes because I take them. And one of the things that as an interviewer I was listening intently for was we versus I. And it was really interesting how two things. One, how often people said I, and as they described the I, as the interviewer, I was thinking, yeah, that wasn't you. Like it was very obvious. And two, how often when I was interviewing women, when they said we, that I had to really press to say, which part of we were you? And as an interviewer, having someone show up and being able to articulate the I of what they did in a truthful way was really, really helpful. It helped save me time and it made a very positive impression on me. So, for folks who are wondering, thinking about their aha moment, that was the aha moment I had this month.
And I think it's
And
so
I'm going to go ahead
important
and
because we get into those interviews and you do, I mean, well, as women, we tend to default to giving credit to everyone. We do. It's just the way we operate. And so the we shows up a lot. And it may be like, oh, I don't want to say I because it comes across like I'm bragging. And I know we're going to talk about this in another live stream session later this year, but it's showing up in the interview. And anytime, actually, let me say, if there's any moment where you should use I, it's in an interview. But use I in the
Yeah.
right, in the authentic way, right? That is the moment to talk about what you did personally and claim that.
Yeah. I loved this, by the way, with Andrea or Andrea. Oh, let me remove this. Oh.
Yeah. Going slow when she's talking. Yes. Yes. Slowing down when I'm talking. I think that's a great commitment to make. And Chelsea, yeah, apologizing when it's not my fault is something I struggle with. It's so funny because we're talking about this right now. And I actually noticed that I apologized to you twice today, Naomi. I don't know if you noticed it,
No.
but no, I did. While we were on this conversation, there's twice now where I started to say something and you interrupt me, which I want you to interrupt me because that's part of what we do. And I was like, oh, sorry. I did. I apologized. I should have just
If it
paused.
helps, I almost said sorry for interrupting because even though again I know we have the back and forth, I really wanted to and it's me. Sometimes I clutch my hands as the physical reminder, do not say sorry when this happens. Hey
It's
Jen, I also want
so
to call
hard. It's so
we're
hard.
at time.
Yes.
So for folks who are joining live, I want to say we want to respect your time and say thank you for joining and for your comments.
And notice that we didn't say sorry for going over our time, but rather thank you for taking the time to be here with us and joining
Works
us
in
today.
progress.
We
Works
are.
in
We're
progress.
working on it. It just goes to show that these are things that we all struggle with. So, yes, I will echo that. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you back here in March when we do our next one.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.